Hey, deserving listeners, I thought I would react to your comments from my videos from the past number of days. So I was reacting to the show, and then you were reacting to my reaction in the comment section, and now I'm reacting to that. This is quite a Bo Burnham Inception situation. I don't know if you can hear the rain. I don't want to be like stereotypical because I'm from Seattle and it's raining. But it's kind of warm right now, and it often is when it rains because the clouds are like this blanket over Seattle. So it is often quite temperate in the wintertime. And although contrary to popular belief, it isn't always raining in Seattle. It's always cloudy in Seattle. That's the thing. But I don't know if you can hear. Can you hear? I'm just going to be quiet for a second. Well, you can sort of hear the dogs and Stacy's walking around in the hallway, but anyway, it's kind of nice. So the comments are amazing. They're always amazing, but they're particularly amazing. So I want to get into it. There's some really good ideas that I'm like learning from. So the very first Love is Blind Season 8, number 1 episode that I published, there were some people who had some comments. Witch Oracle says, as a younger millennial woman, I am very familiar with negging. I would not be at all surprised if that advice is still being passed down in certain dating advice circles, even if they don't call it the pickup artist community anymore. End of comment. Yeah, so I talked a little bit about it, and if you know, then you know. But if you don't, there was a movement, 20 years ago-ish, of the pickup artist community, and that community morphed into the men going their own way, and the incels and the red pill. They're not exactly the same, but they're pretty similar. Funnily enough, I would say the pickup artist community was a lot less toxic, even though at the time I considered it to be quite problematic. Yeah, they had such simple propaganda. And I first discovered it when I had a client that was fully in that world when it was just getting started. And I hadn't heard of it before. And it would have been the year 2000, Conan. Anyway, maybe 2002-ish or something, 2003, 4. And essentially what it was appealing to were men who were having a hard time meeting someone, a partner, heterosexual cis men. And there were a lot of men in Seattle who had moved here for tech and didn't know anyone and were programmers and into computers and stereotypically had trouble with socializing and meeting people. And so they were lonely and had a fairly childish, I was going to say adolescent, but it really goes before that. They had a really childish point of view about what dating was like and what relationships were like and what women were like. And, I don't blame them because they just hadn't had experience. But, they're 30 years old now and they've got a little bit of scratch, a little bit of money, and they finally feel like they want to start dating, and and this is before online dating, so they're just like, what do I do? So they thought they had to go to dance clubs and bars and meet women. And sure, back then especially, that was one of the main ways that people would meet anyone, friends and partners and whatever, hookups. And so these guys would do that, but they would sit in the corner and be a wallflower and watch people interacting and get jealous. And they would start to develop this point of view that is still within the red pill community, this idea of Chads and Stacy's, my mom, my wife's name, Freudian slip there. And they will say that, the assholes always get the girl because the girls are always attracted to the assholes, and the nice guy is always going into the friend zone, and just all that language. And some of it is fine, talking about friend zone might be, but often it's just another way of stigmatizing and misunderstanding and essentially propping up women as these Machiavellian evil creatures that know how to use sexuality to just play men like puppets. And it can feel that way if you're having a hard time, but it's a particular paranoid way of looking at things. You know, you go out, maybe even with your friends, and you see other guys who don't seem to be as nice as you. Maybe they're drunker, or they are a little more dismissive, or I don't know. I don't know what they're observing, but they're over there in the corner going, I'm a nice guy. I would do anything for those women. I would listen to them. I would, play games with them, like board games, and we could go to the park together, and I would be so grateful because, they're lonely. And they think, why am I being rejected? Well, there's an online community that's ready to fill in those gaps and answer those questions by saying it's feminism, and it's about the biological evolution psychology of women and how they will always seek the alpha and all that shit that are all just so stories. They have no basis in science. They might have a basis in culture and an observation, maybe, but often not. So then they propose, as a part of their prescription to solve the problem, was to one, you had to be a peacock. They talked about how you had to dress and do your hair, and you had to think about how you look, and you had to shower and stuff. And so some of this was just good advice for anyone, because if you've been in a basement on a computer for the past 15 years and you just have the same polo shirt and jeans, then yeah, maybe updating your wardrobe, maybe combing your hair and taking a shower would be a good idea, right? And so some of it was actually good advice and helpful. But they would have these tricks, right? Like you needed some really wackadoo element on you. Like you needed a weird hat. Like the main guy, he was called Mystery. And I think he would often wear this like interesting hat. Let's just put it that way. Or you needed like a chain, like think of Zuckerberg with his chain. You need some kind of bling that draws people's attention, that is to differentiate you from the crowd, right? And okay, fine. It's probably not necessary, but if that is a little thing you can do, it's not hurtful and it's not going to harm necessarily, and maybe it'll be a conversation starter. It's like, what's going on with that weird pendant? Oh, well, let me tell you, whatever. But as another part of that was a key prescription for these guys was you had to neg, or to involve yourself in negging, which means as you approach women in a bar, you would compliment, but then you would immediately neg them. You would say something negative. So you might say something like, wow, I really love your eyes, but your outfit, I mean, what's going on with that? I'm not even joking. I'm probably toning it down. The way it was prescribed was rough. And these guys would claim that it worked every time. And they would film themselves. They would certainly tell anecdotes, but sometimes they would film themselves doing it. And lo and behold, it would work. But it's cherry-picked data, right? And even if it did work, what sort of person are you attracting? One. Two, the negging might not have anything to do with it. The person might actually go to a bar and might want to meet someone, and someone comes up and says hi, and they're intrigued, and then they put, an insult happens at them, and they're just like, oh, well, that wasn't good. But, the rest of this is going pretty well. The idea that they thought that they were tapping into was that when you put women on their back heels, then they automatically want to please you. And, there's some sales psychology in here, but okay, maybe with a minority of women or humans that would work. But I'm going to take a guess and say that most sales technique does not involve putting people down or putting people on their heels. And if it did work, why is it working? And with whom is it working? With who? With him. With whom is it working? It's possible, and I don't know if there's been any studies. There might have, actually, because it was quite a thing back in the day, that it might actually work with people who have low self-esteem and or have had experiences with complicated attachments, like with their parents, maybe their father, who both loved and would neg in a way, right? The father would spend time but would criticize. The mother would listen but would pick out criticizable information, or would in the middle of the conversation walk away or something. And so you're in this constant state of like wanting and not getting enough and feeling like you don't deserve it. And so when someone comes up to you and expresses affection or attraction and negs you, it sort of reminds you of that, and it feels familiar, and at the very least you don't really notice it because it's normal to you, or it might even hook you because you're trying to, through repetition compulsion, repeat the past. But I imagine that's a minority, and it's so I would have arguments with these guys, because I had a number of these clients, because like I said, there's a lot of these tech guys in Seattle, and I would say to them, okay, well, let's say that, because they were so brainwashed. It's like, it works. You don't understand. And I'd be like, I do understand. Believe me. And you don't need to do that. And they're like, no, it really works. I mean, I saw it in action, and this, blah, blah, blah. And I would say, okay, fine. Let's say that it works. At what cost? You're basically lying. You're manipulating. What's the goal here? Because the goal that they would say would be to bag as many babes as possible. But I knew that's not what they wanted. I mean, some of the guys might have for some adolescent reason, but because of low self-esteem or something. But some people are just into casual dating. There's nothing wrong with that. But some of the guys, or all the guys that I was talking to, they were desperate for attachment, for closeness, for intimacy, for love. Whether that had to do with marriage or long-term relationships or serial short-time relationships or something, but just like, someone that would appreciate you and listen to you and be attracted to you and prefer you and like you and and laugh at your dumb jokes. That's what anyone wants. So that's what they wanted. And I said, okay, well, fine. Let's say that this works. Well, is this how the story begins? Is this a story you want to tell your grandchildren? I manipulated your grandma to having sex with me, and I tricked her, and because the tricking doesn't end with the neg. The tricking happens all the way through. As soon as you have sex with them, you have to not call them, because that puts them on their heels, and it's just all that shit, and it's just right down the middle, misogyny and toxic masculinity and stuff. And okay, fine, might it work some of the time with some sorts of individuals, maybe, but people are people, and this is what I kept saying. There's no difference between men and women when it comes to the desire to couple, and to a large extent, to the desire to have sex. You are considering the other as this other species with a completely different set of desires and goals in life, and it's just not the case. Culture will orient people, and maybe biology there'll be a slight difference in bell curves, but there are plenty of women out there that are more horny than you. And there are plenty of women out there that are absolutely interested in exploring casual relationships and maybe developing into something. You don't have to manipulate them. You don't have to trick them. So it was hard, because I was essentially trying to argue with a cult member. And that's how it was. It was a cult member, someone who was being propagandized to by charismatic leaders, and it just grew, and it morphed into the MGTOW, MGM, the men going their own way, incels, and so I strangely started to kind of specialize in that work. And then as I started making podcasts 17 years ago, over the years I would get questions along these lines, and I guess because I'm a guy, one of the few guy psychology people, then I would get those kind of questions. And I feel maybe because I come from that world, I would go out a lot with my friends, Umberto and Bob, and if you know those guys. And, I know enough about that world to know that everything that they're saying is tapping into something, but just a complete misunderstanding. And a way of gaining control over members, because a lot of these pickup artist communities would sell classes. And I will say that my client actually did hire a coach that I thought was actually helpful within the pickup artist community, which is another weird thing. You know, I've actually been on, I've been a guest on podcasts that one could actually call the contemporary version of the pickup artist community. And they have similar kinds of taglines, but they also have a lot of really great things to say and a lot of at least neutral things to say, not harmful things to say. So as an example of that, back in the day, I had a client that I would be, really fighting with about this. And it wasn't the only thing that we were working on. It wasn't the only thing he was coming to me for, but it was a major thing. And he had a coach that would take him into bars and would coach him on how to approach women, not even necessarily how, but how to get the nerve up. And a big part of it was just exposure therapy, essentially. And the assignment was, I'm going to tell you to go over to that person and just say hello. Don't harass them, but just introduce yourself. And if they're not interested, then walk away, no big deal. And if they are interested, then, step 2 is tell an anecdote or ask a question. People like to talk about themselves. And this guy, when he told me about he was signing up for this coaching in the world situation, I thought he's too afraid. He's too phobic. That's hard for anyone to do. But for him, that's an impossibility. I mean, this guy is really uptight, and he did it. And when the guy told him, do it, he's like, okay. And you just, it's like in the military, you just don't think and you just go. And it totally broke him of that phobia, and it helped. And he used it for good. He eventually would approach people in public, in bars and stuff, in appropriate venues, because, and in an appropriate way, right? Not like hounding people, but knowing the cues of like, well, those people might be interested in someone coming up and saying hello. I don't, and I'll gauge. And in the end, it was not a bad thing. So, but he still had like a lot of the ridiculous notions in his head, which really otherizes women, right? They make women out to be horrible, evil human beings that you have to trick to be in a relationship with you. And it's not a helpful, it's inaccurate, obviously, but it's also not a helpful way of seeing people, because, once you get in a relationship with them, you're constantly mistrusting everything that they do based on those premises. Anyway, so yeah, which Oracle is saying is that she's saying, I'm a millennial woman, so I'm very familiar with negging because I heard or experienced all that bullshit. And since these cast members, Dave included, is from that generation, he probably came across it, and he might be using that technique either consciously or unconsciously when he's saying, what's wrong with you? And, those kinds of, my dogs are barking. Okay, so I'm going to pause here. The rest of this video is just going to be for members of the YouTube channel. I can't believe I've only gotten to one comment. There's like 30 other comments of equal value. There's a lot to get into about Dave and Lauren and Molly and all that stuff. And so if you want to see this whole video, become a member of this YouTube channel. Otherwise, please take care of yourself, because you deserve it. You really, really do.